Number one is I was surprised to learn how often vulnerability can be used against you and can backfire. There are all sorts of crazy stories that I have in the book of some of the things that CEOs have done. One CEO was a large telecommunications company, and she told me this story of how and her CEO at the time, she was a woman, her CEO at the time was another woman, and this was a big communications company, tens of thousands of employees. And she was one of the top executives there, and she used to sit right next to the CEO. And she noticed one day, she went on vacation, she came back, and all of a sudden her office was moved like 3 doors down. She couldn't figure out what was going on. Then all of a sudden she started to notice that a lot of her employees were being poached and moved onto other teams without her knowledge. Then she started to notice that she was being made fun of in meetings. Then she was given an executive coach to help her, only to find out that that executive coach was reporting everything that she was saying back to the CEO. Then she was put on a performance improvement plan. And finally it got to the point where this lady was just like, I don't know what's going on, I'm out of here. I learned something absolutely insane today. 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed. Are you one of those people? Please make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It'll take you 1 second. It helps me a lot, and you'll get access to more videos just like this one. And this all started because this female executive talked about her vulnerabilities to her CEO. She talked about how she struggled with competence. She talked about how she didn't go to a traditional university and she wasn't, a traditional employee at the company. She opened up about all these different types of things, and her CEO at the time weaponized all those vulnerabilities against her. And so I have all sorts of stories like that. So I was very surprised that even for CEOs, vulnerability at some point will be used against you. A second thing that surprised me is that when you're vulnerable, a lot of these CEOs shared very physiological reactions that they get. And you don't think of this for CEOs, but CEOs were telling me several of them had panic attacks. Several of them, when they were put in vulnerable situations, their heart started beating quickly, their palms got sweaty, they became very nervous. One CEO told me that his voice started to quiver because he was so uncomfortable and nervous in situations. So these are people running multi-billion-dollar companies with tens of hundreds of thousands of employees, and they're going through these very physiological stress responses. So it just goes to show that it's not just an individual contributor or an entry-level employee thing. This is something that everybody struggles with. And so I really love those types of stories. I thought those were quite intriguing. And the other thing is, we alluded to this earlier, a lot of the CEOs acknowledge that vulnerability is a powerful thing, but they weren't sure how to approach it in a work context. And when we surveyed 14,000 employees, we asked them, what's the number one reason why you're not vulnerable at work? And the response to that was, I don't want to be perceived as being weak or incompetent. And so the solution to that is in the question. If you want to avoid being perceived as incompetent, then demonstrate some level of competence whenever vulnerability is there. So again, demonstrate how you're trying to close the gap. And this is really important because there's a concept in psychology called the Pratfall Effect. And I interviewed the creator of this, Elliot Aronson, who is at the University of California, Santa Cruz, which is where I went to school. And the idea of the Pratfall Effect is that if you are highly competent, you're good at your job, and then you're vulnerable, what happens is you get a added boost, a higher perception in terms of your capability, your talent, your quality. Now you're perceived as being more human. However, the flip side of that is also true. If you're not competent at your job and then you're vulnerable, what that does is it reinforces your mediocrity. In other words, people are going to look at you and they're going to say, yeah, I get why you haven't been promoted. Yeah, I get why you're stuck in that role. So there's a very strong and important relationship between competence and vulnerability. And I think that oftentimes we use vulnerability as a way to justify poor performance without realizing that it's actually hurting us far more than it's helping us.